It is an interesting time to be asked to speak at the graduation of Unitarian Universalist seminarians. I stand here today never having been more scared for the future of our faith. I know that's not necessarily what you want to hear on the day you're graduating from seminary. You've invested a lot of time and money and passion. Many of you have families who've sacrificed quite a lot, families who, some of whom are here today. So to be told that we're standing on a precipice, and it wouldn't take much for us to fall off the edge, or that our movement could self-destruct, is not the kind of sentiment one wants to hear on graduation day. Nevertheless, I'd say right now we are facing a crisis of faith about whether our tradition and its values can offer a real answer to racial oppression. Can Unitarian Universalism really form communities where all people will truly be free and empowered and in right relationship? Let's face it. Liberal religion is on trial today. Maybe it's because we don't take evil seriously enough. Is that why we try and try but still haven't found a solution that can effectively dismantle entrenched forms of oppression, even within our own communities? Maybe our critics are right, who say that we're way too naive about human hardwiring and biology, and that people will always compete for power in ways that create injustice. Those who also say, if it's not race, then it will be something else that divides us, in a cycle of dominance that never ends, only changing who's in charge. Maybe we're flat wrong about the existence of some kind of justice towards which the arc of the universe bends. What actual experience do we have that a thing could exist and rightfully be called beloved community? The larger issue is that it's a lot more than liberal religion and Unitarian Universalism on trial today. The premise of liberalism itself, including liberal democracy, is being challenged. And if you're keeping score, currently liberalism is losing in politics and religion all over the world. Can liberalism, and more specifically to you and me, can liberal religion develop a model of using power that is moral and sustainable? I'll tell you one thing. Nothing could make the critics of liberalism and the critics of Unitarian Universalism feel more vindicated than to see us destroy ourselves, to see us fail, proving in their eyes what they've been saying all along was true, that a free faith and a liberating faith such as ours is spurious, immoral, idealistic, unrealistic, and ultimately destined for the dustbin of history. What's come into question is whether we can give birth to a community the likes of which the world has never seen before. Or will we fail and hope that someone else will come along to take up the dreams of our forebearers, the dreams embedded in hymns like Forward Through the Ages? Our idea of forward through the ages is rooted in our faith in the promise of freedom. In seminary, we learn to call it by fancy words like the hermeneutic of freedom. You don't get to use that word anymore after you leave seminary, so this is a rare opportunity. I figured I had to pull it out for today. But by whatever name, it involves both freedom of belief and conscience and freedom from bondage and oppression. Often we imagine that the fruit of freedom is beloved community. But I'm wanting to remind us that the first fruit of freedom is division. To free the captives requires disrupting the lives of the captors. To free the oppressed involves disturbing the status quo of the oppressors. If you free the Hebrews, you're going to piss off Pharaoh and the Egyptians. There's no way around it. Division is the first fruit and the natural outcome of religious freedom. As Unitarian Universalism has grown more diverse and more savvy about power, we've come to understand that we have within our covenanted community those who are oppressed in various ways in our society and those who are oppressors. We have Hebrews and Egyptians. Also, with our growing awareness of intersectionality, we know that many of us have multiple identities that combine to create a complex equation of power and oppression. I'm inspired today by Reverend Robert McGaffey Brown, a Presbyterian minister and professor of religious studies at Stanford, who gave a powerful speech to a worldwide assembly back in 1975 in Jakarta. He was kicking off a conference on the theme, Jesus Christ Frees and Unites. Brown understood his social location as a white, well-educated, affluent Christian man from the United States, and he understood his audience from all over the world and how they viewed American power and dominance in the world. And so in his sermon, he added a word to the conference title. He explained that Jesus Christ frees, unites, and divides. His words are so prescient for us today that I could have almost just read his sermon up here. Like Brown, I stand here with all of my privilege as a white, cisgendered, male, well-educated, straight, able-bodied, and employed. It's time in our movement and in our nation when people like me need to be doing more listening and less talking. It's something that's become very clear in Tulsa, Oklahoma this past week. On Wednesday, a white police officer was found not guilty of shooting and killing Terrence Crutcher, an unarmed African-American man who was shot with his hands up. The verdict exposed the way that the majority of African-American Tulsans and the majority of white Tulsans see and are impacted by the situation completely differently. It reminds me of the O.J. Simpson verdict back in 1995. It reminds me also of how white Americans and African Americans viewed the events of Hurricane Katrina very differently, the response to it very differently back in 2005. And in Tulsa, this is another one of those moments when it's become painfully clear that one of the effects of racism is that we often are not able to really listen or understand one another's points of view and experiences of this country that we live in. And I see the same problem happening among us within Unitarian Universalism in certain places right now. Leaders of color among us are experiencing something painful in this movement that's not automatically apparent, and in some cases is radically different from what white people see. When this happens in our churches or in society, the first response must be for the majority to listen deeply to those who are hurting and crying out from the margins. This past Thursday, our staff in Tulsa came together to process the verdict. We made space for our African American staff members to speak first if they wanted to, and the rest of us listened with our hearts and our minds wide open. I asked permission to share some of what I heard. We listened to Jojo, who is 20 years old and bright and kind and loving and big and black and beautiful. He shared how he woke up that morning, and for a long time, he considered writing a long note and leaving it under his bed. Just in case it happens to me, he said, and I end up dead at the hands of the police. He talked about how sometimes he finds himself thinking how painful it would feel for a bullet to enter his body. And he can't help it, but he finds himself imagining what it would feel like to fall down on the pavement from a bullet wound and bleed to death. Now, he's not a soldier. He's not in gangs. He's just a young black man walking around in America in the 21st century. Two mothers shared their inescapable fear for the lives of their sons and their sense of not knowing what to say to their children about the verdict and what it means about the world that we live in. Our staff literally wept together as we listened to person after person speak and held the pain together. We were having what Michael Mead calls a second layer conversation. The first layer of social interaction is superficial. It's the layer that involves manners and kind speech and polite greetings and other surface-level courtesies. At many other workplaces in Tulsa that day, the conversation was simpler. The jury did their job, and they did a good job. Even those who disagreed probably didn't dare to say it. The first layer is that level of community that maintains the simple harmony of the status quo, with exchanges like, "How are you?" "Fine," and ends with the blessing, "Have a nice day." The truth is that you may feel that if one more thing goes wrong, that you're going to start throwing things at people, but when asked, "How are you?" you answer, "Fine." You might wish the person in front of you would crawl into a hole and die, but you still tell her, "Have a nice day." And as disingenuous as the words are on the surface, they're needed at certain times and in certain ways for social survival and for society to keep going. But if a person or a community stays too long on that level, a larger and a larger shadow grows. And you end up with a society where people living in the same city see the identical situation completely differently. On what Michael Mead calls the third level is our sense of deeply shared humanity and the experience of beloved community. The third layer is the realm of deep unity, profound forgiveness, and the siblinghood of all people. In the conversation on Thursday among our staff, our student minister, Yadni, talked passionately and painfully about how she knew she needed to be with us. On that morning, she had other things to do, but she had to come in and be there as we talked together. She mentioned how significant it was to be in a space where white allies listened with no intention to talk back to the people of color voices, just listened. And also how significant it was to hear the allies sharing their own drive and pain to end white silence in their circles and in the places and spaces that she may never go or be heard or be seen. She shared how relieving it is to her to have others who understand it isn't her responsibility to fix or enlighten us all. We had a similar conversation back in September when Terrence Crutcher was initially killed and the video footage came out among our intercultural leaders of the church. Everyone there mentioned how thankful they were to have the relationship so that we could be together that night. One older woman, who was African American, said that she was going to just go home and didn't want to even see a white person. But before our gathering was over, she said, "I'm so glad I came tonight. I needed to be around white people who get it and who I love and who love me. I would have just gone home and been isolated with all these painful feelings. But now I'm reminded that something greater is possible and that I can be a part of it." What I can tell you for myself is that being in a multiracial and otherwise diverse religious community has transformed my life. It's profoundly changed the way I think, what I pay attention to, how I understand the world and my place in it. And you can't achieve this kind of experience at a demonstration or at a march. As important as those are, people are not listening and transforming and healing each other the way that you are in a loving, multiracial, and diverse and covenanted community. The reason that it's so difficult to reach this realm of such transformational and loving community is because it requires passing through the second layer with all the risks of division and all the pain. The second layer is the realm of anger and outrage and disgust and discord and acrimony, blaming and shaming and naming things that often go unsaid. It's the realm of, I can't take it anymore. I won't stand for it. I've had enough. The second layer, which we are solidly in right now as Unitarian Universalists, regarding issues of race especially, and we are in Tulsa, and we are in America. This second layer involves feelings and attitudes that we would rather not have, and emotions that we would definitely not choose. So even though we're not the chosen people, we are people who choose. That's the foundation of freedom. It's why historically we were called heretics, from the Greek word to choose. So instead of choosing to stay in some superficial peace and unity in the first layer of manners and politeness that maintain the status quo, we choose to express and feel emotions that we might prefer not to, because we believe in the third layer reality, which is the possibility of beloved community, grounded in freedom and justice for all. I've come to appreciate what our colleague Michael McGee has said, that ministers are really professional wrestlers. Our calling, he says, is to wrestle with ideas, with feelings, with other ministers, with politicians, sometimes even with board presidents, and with our congregations. We choose to wrestle with issues such as family, inequality, sexuality, gender, and addiction. He goes on, this ongoing grappling we do forces us to call on our deeper resources so that we can help others and ourselves to dance into our full humanity, to become who we have the potential to be. The most difficult wrestling we must do, of course, is with ourselves. We must wrestle with our own self-doubts and privilege and power and oppressions. Those of us like myself who've been historically and presently advantaged by the systems of inequality based on race, gender, ability, and 101 other criteria used to ascribe power in our society, we have to wrestle with our fears of losing our positions, our prestige, our privileges, preferences, and prerogatives. For those of you who on this day is a step in your transition from an amateur to a professional wrestler, I encourage you to continue to grapple with your weaknesses and your strengths, to include your struggles when you preach and teach and counsel and lead. Remember that, like Jacob in the Bible, who it says wrestled with an angel and would not let go or give up until he was blessed. I hope for all the new graduates and all of us who care about this free tradition that we won't give up or let go without insisting on God's blessing. Let's hang on. Let's not settle for some superficial peace or false unity. Let's learn how to decenter white race-based thinking and culture in our daily lives and in our churches. Let's decenter the dominant narrative in order to forge a new kind of community. Let's stop letting the paradigms of, I'm going to say it, white supremacy, by which I do not mean the Ku Klux Klan. I mean the subtle but devastating conception that European cultural norms are superior, or that it's okay for those white normative values to take up all or most of the space at the center of the culture in the UUA or in America. If we don't fully engage with the differences that are dividing us, it could defeat us. But my experience tells me that with solid leadership and faith in freedom's promise, by listening to each other deeply, and especially listening to those who are at the margins, and finding ways to bring the historically marginalized people and perspectives to the center, this turmoil will turn out to be an angel in disguise. It will bless us if we persist. And so I charge you, this new class of theological graduates, to help lead us. Help lead us as together we create new kinds of life-saving communities rooted in freedom, unafraid of conflict, and destined to bring about justice for all of life's children. Graduates, remember when ministry gets scary, and it gets painful, and it gets confusing and risky, and when it gets real like it is right now, that's when the magic happens. That's when the healing happens. That's when the dreams and hope are born again. I believe in you, and I believe in this free faith. God bless you, and congratulations.